Ladies and gentlemen, very warm welcome to probably the last of our FSC Connect sessions whilst being on level 3. I think everyone got really good news yesterday. So these sessions have been really valuable in terms of helping to get discussion out on the table, get insights from people who are experts in their particular field, and keep the FSC community connected as we've gone through a really torrid time. Although feels like there's been some silver linings in the torrid time in the way that we work, the way that we think, the way that we connect, and certainly this Zoom approach has been really good. And so in that regard today, really absolutely delighted to welcome 4 leading lights from the legal fraternity. We have Lloyd Kavanagh from MinterEllisonRuddWatts, David Ireland from Dentons, Kensington, Swan, Tracey Cross from DLA Piper, and Tim Williams from Chapman, Tripp. And we are going to have a really interesting discussion as we go through today. As we do with most of our sessions, down the bottom of your Zoom bar, for those of you who may not have used it before, is a Q&A button and a chat button. And if you have any Q&As or chats, feel free to share your thoughts, ask your questions. These sessions work really well when there's a lot of interactivity. So we totally encourage that. The way we're going to run today is I'm going to spontaneously just invite each of our panelists to do a little 2-minute opener on what they've seen as the biggest thing keeping them up at night. And then there's a whole bunch of questions that we've got, but we'll totally be guided by the people on the end of the Zoom call. Today is completely recorded, so what we'll be looking to do is to edit and then put it up on screen in case you want to know more. It also obviously means we are on the record. And so without further ado, warm welcome. And David Ireland, what's been keeping you up at night over the last 8 weeks?
Okay, so I'm first up. Thanks, Richard. Welcome, everyone. What's keeping me awake at night? Look, to be honest, it's actually just working out how I'm going to squeeze everything in that needs doing during the day for the next day. I don't know about everyone else, but I thought I was busy before lockdown. But since mid-March, we've really had an explosion on the demands and time with sort of veritable plague of conference calls, team meetings, virtual catch-up, webinars. So apologies to everyone for this one adding to the mix. Hopefully it'll be worthwhile for you all. But much of it has been great. And looking at these virtual group hug sessions and the connectivity we all enjoy, I think it's really great. It's fantastic to have all this on board, provided, of course, your Wi-Fi is okay, which I know has been an issue for quite a few. But it sure is a new juggling act we've all had to come to grips with. Look, at a more substantive level, I think what's keeping me and the team awake at night, preparing for the days ahead, probably broken down into 2 aspects. There's the mental side of things, and then there's logistical challenges. On that mental side, really think about the work focus. So the PM has talked about the 3 S's of level 2, right? So seated, separated, single servers. For us, I think the lockdown upheaval, the work focus can be broken down into 3 C's. The first C for us has been change. So we had the immediate adjustment required to everyone needing to work remotely. I think we were able to manage that pretty well after having a BCP dummy run, work from home as a trial last year. It still takes a bit of time to adjust to that new groove. Nevertheless, the focus then quickly moved to keeping on top of all the swathe of regulatory responses and relief mechanisms that followed the lockdown announcement. And those responses really show no sign of letting up. There's been a few more through today. We're going to get some more following a budget, no doubt. It just keeps coming. One of the majors for me has probably been working through the implications of the delay to FSLA, and I will come on to that a bit later in the session. But of course, we're not just keeping up with those reforms just for the sake of it. Knowledge has to have a purpose, which brings us to the second C, which really is our clients. So that involves thinking about how we can help our clients with the regulatory challenges that have been thrown at them by the lockdown, such as helping a few, and I know all the other panelists have been involved in this, sort of helping manage those practical difficulties involved in facilitating sort of KiwiSaver hardship withdrawals was an initial panic that we all had to work through. It then extends, I guess, to working with our clients to ensure that they're able to continue delivering their great customer outcomes through that lockdown period and beyond. And we've seen lots of really good mahi happening out there, so that's been great to see. Then the last C is the crystal ball. So that's looking to the future beyond level 1, and there will be a future beyond level 1. It's just trying to work out what the hell that's going to be. So we've been spending a bit of time on that, and Dentons KS has been running an initiative called the Big Reset, where we're collecting and posting thought pieces on how New Zealand can thrive in the next new normal. So I'd encourage everyone to plug for the website, jump onto that and have a look at that if you're interested in checking that out. That's really planning for what the future will look like, and that's becoming an increasing focus for us, especially as we move forward to level 2 and hopefully beyond. On the logistical side of things, many of you will know just a month before lockdown, our firm combined with Dentons worldwide, so the world's largest law firm. So we've now got offices in 75 different countries, which throws up its own logistical challenges. A key theme for Dentons has been our global connectivity. And I've sat through a number of the Dentons global town hall sessions that happen where firms leaders from around the world share their insights, including regular slots for attendees from little old New Zealand. I think we're a bit quirky. We always like to hear something from New Zealand because we're a bit different. But a lot of those other offices, well, all of them operate in different time zones. So all of those sessions tend to happen between midnight and 3 a.m. So that's a practical reason to be kept awake at night, just to check into those things. And so with that theme of connecting from different locations, I'm delighted to provide diversity to this particular session by being the sole representative from Wellington. So Richard, that's enough from me. Just back to you, and thanks for the invitation.
Thank you, David. And of course, my great challenge is to try and help 4 senior lawyers keep to 2 minutes. So we'll have the next crack. And Lloyd, over to you.
So things have changed quite a lot over the 8 weeks, both for us at MinterEllisonRuddWatts and also for our clients. We all started off with the priority, and the thing we were worrying the most about was keeping our people and our clients physically safe and mentally safe, because different people have coped with what we've been through in different ways. And I think for New Zealand as a whole, that's gone remarkably well. Of course, there are still risks for us to look out, but now we're in the challenge of having to do what I heard described in one podcast as wearing bifocals. So focusing on the sorts of things that David's been talking about, the new issues arising day by day, some of which have parallels in past crises, others completely not. But also trying to look out to the medium long term, because my own view is when we talk about returning to normal, it's probably a misnomer. There will be a new normal, but I doubt that the way in which we operate will ever be quite the same as it was. In many ways, that's positive, and there are great winds to come out of the dark cloud, as well as a silver lining. But we'll talk probably a little bit more about that as we go. And that the proximate issues have been helping numbers of clients help with difficult issues, legislation that was drafted or documents drafted decades ago where no one could imagine that you couldn't meet face to face with someone to get a declaration done. The volatility models that we had even back from the GFC being tested again, older documents perhaps having legacies from those times, some other things having been simplified. So it's been, as David says, a very busy time, lots of insights and lots of learnings. I'll keep it there, Richard.
Awesome, many thanks, Lloyd. And Tracey, over to you. What's kept you up at night over the last 8 weeks?
Thanks, Richard. Good afternoon, everyone. I think, well, it hasn't been these COVID vivid dreams I've been hearing about. Unfortunately, I've missed out on those. And I know that we're going to talk about all the legal sort of technicalities, so I won't cover that. What's kept me up at night has been people. It's been my family, friends, my colleagues, my clients. It's questioning into, how we're going to get through and come out of these times. And, are we resilient? Do we have the skills that we should have been developing prior? How we can support people for really working effectively at home. And we know that as New Zealanders, we're very stoic. You're asked, are you fine? It's, yeah, of course I am. It's how you get below the levels and actually really understand how someone's feeling sort of working remotely and how they can be effectively supported. It's one thing to send them home with a screen and a chair and calling them sort of every so often, but it's another thing to actually know that they are sort of actually comfortable at home. I just want to touch on though, one thing that's keeping me up at night at the moment though moving forward is that we're going to come out of this and we're going to go back to our old ways. And I think that that would be the great travesty. I think that COVID-19 has been a big pause and reset button. It's given us an opportunity to slow down, to reflect both personally and, you know, in our business lives as to just what we're doing well, what we're not doing well, what we need to fix, what we need to improve. And I think now is a really important period to actually take those learnings and to think about them and to actually work them back into our business to be moving forward. Also, you know, we've been talking about conduct and culture for the last 2 years. How has our culture helped us in these sort of times? What were the changes that we made or didn't make? You know, now's sort of the time of action. So I think that if we don't actually do something with these learnings and take them forward, then that will certainly keep me up at night for quite some time.
Thanks, Tracey. We're going to come back to some of those themes in a moment. But Tim, lastly to you, what's been the big stuff over the last 8 weeks as you've reflected?
So thank you for that, and thank you. Welcome everybody. I guess the business of usual side of work has continued on pretty seamlessly and successfully. I guess if you think back for a long period of time, law firms have operated outside office in times of crisis in Auckland before we've had other GFC type related events that have meant we're pretty well prepared, and I imagine all the firms are pretty much in the same point. So I'm not going to talk about, you know, the way we've managed to continue performing. What I've been thinking about at night, which is the time when I sort of switch off from doing the day job to other more esoteric sort of thoughts, I've been thinking about the role of the government decision-making, the regulators and their decision-making and evaluating those things, thinking about the economy as a whole and what it's going to be like in the new normal. You know, with are we going to bounce back out of this rapidly? Is this going to take 3 or 4 years, as most crises have taken in the past? What's different this time that might mean it's different, or should we be going back to what we've known? Being a more senior partner at Chapman Tripp, of course, some of that experience we've been able to pass on to some of the more junior partners and important decisions the firm are taking. But also, I think just people generally find it interesting thinking about the economy and where we're going to go in the bigger picture. And last, of course, and not least, just thinking about the effect this is going to have on our clients, primarily from a strategic point of view, mainly thinking about, are we going to go through another few years now of, you know, limited innovation? I've got a sense that the last few years have been really limited in the innovation we've done in the funds area, particularly because of the distractions of compliance and culture. And I was hoping that we were getting to the stage where we were getting towards the end of that, and we're going to see some new innovative ideas coming through to benefit clients. But I suspect now a lot of the next couple of years are going to be dealing with you know, downturn in the economy and the like. So those are sort of the biggest sort of picture issues I've been thinking about. In the context of government, for example, primarily in this industry group, the issues have been around you know, the delay of FSLA and what's that going to lead to, and we had a very good session on that just the other day with FSC, talking about the impact there. Triple CFA, the impacts there, and the new introduced changes, how that's going to affect some of our clients. In the regulator space, more the conduct and culture, the impact that's going to continue to have, and whether you know, well, that's ongoing, and the extent to which that's going to be ramped up as a result of this. The areas of increased tolerance have been an area of distraction an area where we've had to focus to ensure that where customers our clients have found it challenging to meet a particular deadline, to make sure that that is covered in the range of areas that have either got relief or there are solutions there. Hardship was one where we got very actively involved with one particular or two particular clients where we volunteered to take statutory declarations over computers and provide solutions that way. So at times thinking innovatively to solve problems. The internet has stood the test of this, and I think a lot of people will come away highly impressed how much we can do online, and I'm looking forward to the continued development of that. I won't go on at length about this, but the rule of law and the separation of powers and all this sort of, and the political process, thinking about those sorts of things as well, which are probably not that relevant immediately to the day job that I do, but they are points that, from a philosophical point of view, I do like to focus on. From the economy, whether we're going to bounce back, and everyone's got their own view, I suppose. This is a bit different to last time. I think the government learned and the governments worldwide learned a huge amount from the GFC about how to stimulate when the recessionary clouds are growing, and the low interest rates we've got now and the considerable fiscal stimulus is going to lead to a very interesting experiment as to how we're going to bounce out of a potentially quite significant recession. In some ways, I haven't seen as much horror as it was at the GFC time, but I think that's partly in relation to the markets and finance and economic matters, simply because I think people are distracted by the health issues. And I think as the health issues decline to take such prominence, the severe impact on the economy is going to take more attention. And the lastly on that, thinking a wee bit about government and whether I do it in a differently myself. Would the support be more targeted? Would there be more conditions? As a lawyer, we always like to put conditions on things. Are we getting the most efficient outcomes from the government's regulatory and government's response to COVID-19? And are we getting the best value for the dollars they're putting back into the economy? And those sorts of things are distracting me, as people who know me well would realise. So hopefully that was a bit close to the 2 minutes, Richard. Probably not.
Thanks, Tim. That was very flexible 2 minutes. I might go, if I can, to Tracey. And Tracey, just pick up that discussion that you opened the door to around reg change. Obviously, we've had a re-timetabling on most of the major platforms around regulation. So the question, if you open the batting, is what do you see? What do you see as the big impacts of that, and what kind of guidance are you giving to your clients around what's the next best steps to take?
Well, I think firstly, it's great that industry is being listened to, and we do have those extensions to the regulatory timeframe. I think, though, that the important thing is that it's not taking the foot off the pedal, and that's certainly a message that we're giving to clients, and I think it's pretty pleasing to see the activity that is still being maintained in the industry. I think that the extension, certainly around FSC, has given those providers that haven't been that might not have made the 29 June deadline more time, and certainly those in the insurance industry, insurance brokers that haven't really had this compliance regime, and it's all new to them. So I think it's good. I think the message is that it's keeping on with it. I think it's not very efficient, and it's certainly not cost effective to be putting down projects and files and then picking them up again. That's not really doing anyone any favours. I think, though, it also gives an opportunity for the likes of MB to put the bones around the COFI body and to consult further with industry. I think that one of the messages is also for the regulator, for MB, is that we need the detail that we're waiting for, the disclosure regulations around FSC, final licensing details. Only with those can providers really effectively take steps to get ready, so that they are ready to go when it all comes into play. So I guess there's messages there not only for clients, the regulator, but also for MB to actually assist the industry to be ready on time.
Because it is hard, isn't it, to, in effect, and it's not just hard for sectors, it's likely hard for MB and the regulators. They had a timetable of execution the flight plan was pretty much set, and almost within a moment's notice, the rug got pulled out from everyone. How do you help people think about making sure people don't lose the momentum, actually stay on point, even though the timetable shifted somewhat?
Well, I think it's all sort of working together. I think we've all got to hold each other sort of accountable and to keep the conversations going, to keep the interest, sort of permeating around these sort of topics. I think it's just, keeping on with it, because the more time you have, if you get the sort of the basics, your framework sort of done, you can then sort of finesse it. You can make sure that your new processes are going to be well and truly embedded within your organisation prior to the regime coming into play, that everyone's sort of really trained and everyone's on the same page. So there's real benefits for individual businesses in keeping the foot on the pedal.
Thanks, Tracey. Lloyd, what's your take on this particular topic, and how have you framed it to your clients?
So one of the things that I think has been interesting in a whole raft of conversations that I've been fortunate enough to be in with leaders of organisations like the Reserve Bank or the FMA, and some of them have been courtesy of the FSC, and there are some others, is they're really clear that conduct and culture is remaining one of the top 3 issues for all businesses. And I was kind of, first of all, my reaction was that makes sense, but it's interesting, why would they justify that? And it was most succinctly summed up for me by Rob Everett, who pointed out that in a time of economic turbulence, which we've only seen the beginning of yet, every organisation is going to have more vulnerable customers than they have ever had before. And then he went on and pointed out not only that, but a bunch of them are going to be what he called the newly vulnerable, which is an expression that I found very useful and am finding useful talking to clients. So one of the ironies, in a sense, of people who are vulnerable because they're elderly or because of their economic situation or otherwise marginal in societies, it's probably been their life story for a long time, and they've got they're aware that they're vulnerable. What we're going to see, and we have seen it before coming out of the GFC for a brief period, although that was quite a V-shaped recession, is we're going to see, if things go badly in the economy, many people who come under financial pressure that they haven't been under before. I guess we got a foretaste of that with all of the huge wave of KiwiSaver hardship inquiries, many of which I understand then have not resulted in hardship withdrawals, but that will come back. And so I think that message for clients about keep focusing on conduct and culture is important, because number one, it's important for the customers, but then secondly, the regulators, and I include the Commerce Commission in this, have all flagged that they are watching and remaining vigilant. The flip side then in the regulatory environment though, and this is more about the continuing reform, is I think there's going to be a shift in the way in which people react, industry reacts to the proposals to keep increasing the regulatory burden. To date, to speak very frankly, which have been in good times, there's been a long run bull market. Basically, people have found it hard to argue against increased regulatory burden because they've been doing well, they could deploy additional resources. But we've seen this before. I go back to the early 1990s. In tough times, people are going to end up being very focused on efficiency. And that means I think people are going to be more motivated to make submissions and point out the costs inherent in some proposals as well as the benefits. And if you take one example, I guess the AML sector has done a lot in terms of the war against the laundering of criminal proceeds, but aspects of the regime are quite inefficient. And one of the things that we've been helping Digital Identity New Zealand with, and there'll be a report that comes out in a month or two's time, is does it really work as efficiently as possible? Is it an impediment to customers moving between businesses? And are we enabling people to establish new relationships as efficiently as they could? So I think we're going to see a big shift in the way in which people put forward their submissions.
Thanks, Lloyd. I'm going to segue from that, and David, I'll go to you if I can. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? What turned up really at the outset of COVID is there's only really one area of focus, and that is to help consumers and clients kind of navigate pretty uncharted territory. And probably the second priority was to help our teams and our employees to do the same. Everything else almost took a second seat or a back seat. Could you make maybe some comments on the conduct and culture piece, and then as it pertains to kind of the resilient consumers, and ultimately how we as the New Zealand financial services sector kind of help people charter the next wave of whatever that looks like?
Yeah, thanks for that, Richard. It's a quite wide-ranging question there to flow through. And look, I think, let's think, it is all stepping back on a couple of the points talked about before, sort of reactive of going through things. I think it's really important now, just I guess, to pause to actually look back, take perhaps the opportunity now to do that reset. Tracey and I both mentioned that, I guess, that reset point. It is going to be different in the future, whatever we come back with. There are going to be the newly vulnerable, different types of clients. So it's really important, I think, for businesses, everyone in our sector, to step back and look at, well, what is that new demographic of the clients going to look like? How are we going to help support the newly vulnerable or the broader sector of society? There's going to be some tough times ahead, and the financial services sector can actually deliver a lot of good for New Zealand society. We can actually, look back at, we've got a bit of a beat up from Australian Royal Commission, everything else that's happened in the past. Now is actually, I guess, an opportunity for the sector to pull together and just show the real value of this industry that we are working in and what it can deliver for people. And on that side, and actually picking up on one of Lloyd's themes about some of the regulatory burdens, difficulties of dealing with, how some of the regulation perhaps gets in the way of all our clients, providers, delivering good outcomes for customers. I think it has been fantastic to see the reaction from the FMA and a lot of the relief that has been provided. It's been really fast, really snappy, sort of jumping in and delivering some meaningful relief for some of the compliance burdens. We're blessed in New Zealand, I think, with our ability to engage with both FMA and the MB and EMB to just talk through some of these issues and get some pretty prompt action and be confident that we can actually deliver good things, and we've got the flexibility to respond to whatever life may throw at us.
Thanks, David. That's a pretty interesting point, and probably the difference as we go into a conversation about what's happening locally, regionally, and globally, because we're immensely blessed at a political and a regulatory level that it feels like we're all on the same team in terms of managing the crisis, as opposed to getting different messages or different agendas and so on. Any particular observations on that, particularly given your kind of global reach within Dentons?
Look, it's really interesting. We've sat in on a global insurance group conference call a couple of weeks ago. That was about 10 o'clock at night, so it was reasonably civilized for most of these things. And actually just comparing the fact of what colleagues over in Asia and in Europe and the US are then dealing with in terms of their interface with regulators is just completely different. And it's more like, I guess, we are unique in New Zealand in terms of that, very constructive, proactive relationship, the ability to pick up the phone, talk to key people at the FMA who actually wants to help you, that they're not wanting the regulations to get in the way. We're all sort of driving at this common area or the common objective. That is actually quite unusual, and that's been the thing that struck me when you're talking with people from the other side of the world. It's a very different environment there that they're dealing with, very different relationships they do have with regulators, and that's something that we should cherish. And absolutely, it's a fantastic thing that we have got going for us, and another reason why I think we will come out of this current crisis in much better shape than perhaps a lot of the other jurisdictions, admittedly, that have got much greater health issues at present, but we're very well placed on that regulatory side to deal with things.
Thanks, David. Tracey and Lloyd, I'll come to you in a moment on that same topic, but Tim, can I go to you? You and I were talking earlier in the week around For those of us who've been around the traps a bit, this is the second or third, or for some people longer, big major recessionary times. All have their own flavour as you go in, flavour as you're in it, and flavour as you come out. What's your sense of the magnitude of what's in front of us, or where we're at now, at an economic sense, and kind of what does that ultimately mean for businesses in our sector?
Thanks, Richard. Actually, I just want to pick up a point before I get onto that topic that was raised before about the new vulnerable and the way forward, the new normal. One of the effects that might come out of this, and I'm hopeful, is that the increased attention to business that's come through COVID-19, having dealt with the health issues and responded to the health issues, then there's been this rising recognition that business is the lifeblood of our economy, and that there are a lot of businesses that are vulnerable. They're not all big institutions from offshore. There are SMEs out there, and they are paying a price as a result of the effect on the economy. And it's possible, and I'm hopeful that picking up Lloyd's point, that when it comes to new legislation, there will be an increased recognition that business is affected by legislation, particularly inefficient legislation, and that there will be a greater willingness to listen to the points made on submissions on legislation and consider the effect that new legislation, new changes are going to have on what is now another class of vulnerable persons. Moving from that, though, to the question at hand, which was more about the effect on the economy. Look, every economist will have a different view, and as a trained economist, but not a practicing one, mine is very much not a professional view. But my particular view on the economy is you've got two hugely competing forces. One is the slowdown in the economy, driven by, firstly, the reduction in the velocity of money, reducing the money supply. And so there is and money has, a lot of households are better off because they haven't been spending so much money, but what you're not seeing is money traveling around the economy nearly as much, and that won't start up on a heartbeat, I don't believe. I think that people only spend money when they've received it themselves, often as a sort of bit of a paradigm, that or feel comfortable in really opening the purse strings until they've got it in the bank. So it's almost like a train starting slowly and chugging slowly, and will rebuild as people build confidence. And it needs to have the economy will need to have a relatively smooth run from here. But there are all sorts of impacts that are going to happen that will affect the economy way forward. And looking back in the past, crises like this have taken years to fully get over. The idea that we'd be back in a few months was highly optimistic in my view. The 1987 crash, which hit New Zealand harder than the rest of the world, that lasted, I think, really to 1992. And it only really ceased at that sort of point because the government was prepared to allow interest rates to fall, which they were at 22% at one point. They fell down to 14 in September 1992. And that's what sort of kick-started the economy. And this is the point I raised before about how from the GFC and the responses, particularly coming out of America, of flooding the economy with money, lowering interest rates, all have helped address some of those significant impacts on the economy. The other thing that happened, of course, with these great crises was that governments felt they needed to solve the problem by legislation. So we got in the States in '87 the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which is the first I was familiar with of this phenomenon. But it's been suggested that even the Financial Advisors Act, which is being rewritten now into FSLA, that was reaction to the 2008 crisis. So legislation can come through and have a faster track because of the urgent need seen from the effects of a recession, and often that is less well thought through than would be ideal. And that brings me to the topic of COFI, the the legislation on the conduct of institutions, which fits in with Lloyd's comment about conduct and culture. And there are some fundamental flaws in that legislation that I hope will be ironed out in the select committee process. As a result of submissions, I really hope that the government isn't going to brush over those submissions in order to get an immediate response to the recession and show that they're doing something. There are problems with the fact that it seems that you have to consider individuals when drafting and developing insurance policies. Now, at an individual level, that's just an impossibility, but it's there in the drafting. Those sorts of things need to be ironed out. So going a wee bit off beam, I guess, but that is a hope that I've got, that government will respond not only with its recognising the immediate crisis and the impact, but also will start recognising that people work in financial services businesses as well. They have been adversely affected by this crisis. It's not just the consumer that's affected. It needs to be a balancing act between the interests of business and the interests of everybody and the interests of the consumer as well. So I've got great hopes that things will come out of this positively. I see that the economy will take a reasonable time, medium term, not short term, time to recover. We haven't seen some of the worst impacts yet, which will reflect the long-term impact on borders and the lack of people arriving in the country. They contributed considerably to growth. The impact on our tourism sector, which is one of our largest sectors, all of those factors aren't going to be seen just in the month that we've had. This is more the health month and the immediate impact on retail and hospitality. But there's going to be a while before the economy gets back to the levels that it was at before. So we've got a lot ahead of us. There'll be lots of change.
No, that's great. We've got about 7 or 8 minutes left, folks. Lloyd, I'm just going to go to you for that comment on the Minter's view locally, regionally and globally, but also if you can pick up, and this is further to Tim's point, obviously there have been through the COVID-19 process serious downturn in some sectors, as he's pointed to. Are there any bright lights? Are there any areas that the reverse is happening, where there have been opportunities, businesses are actually flourishing as a result of this kind of change consumer behaviour?
So there's 2 themes I draw together on that, and I'm conscious of the shortness of time. I give you one example which benefits from both of them. Is I think this is going to be the beginning of a great pivot for the New Zealand economy and financial services more and more towards digital solutions. One of our clients, Sharesies, big challenge through this process, and they're an online broker, I guess, aiming at small customers, has been to cope with the massive uptick in volume and increasing their bond with the NZX, for example. And that's driven by technology, people learning to do things remotely. You don't have to go in and sit across the desk from some old dude. You can use a digital solution, which going back for the last couple of years we've known is coming. But I think this will have a major boost in its momentum. And then the other thing, so here's a little anecdote. So our one of our team assistants, when we're talking to her about coming back to work and whether she wanted to work from the office or from home, said, you know what I've learned is actually everything's gone, once I got used to it, as efficiently working from home, and I'm saving myself about $100 to $120 a week by not having to travel into the office from Avansdale. And I said, well, that's really interesting. What are you doing with that money? And she said, well, actually, I'm investing it. I'm not going out and spending it. And that's kind of a link to Sharesies. I don't think those stories are unique. I think this is the beginning of a great pivot. And sorry, though, I feel for the many people in hospo and tourism and other industries. If it helps boost the digital sector in New Zealand, where our exports and our foreign income is more dependent on our ideas and exporting our ideas and technology than having huge volumes of people coming into the country for a short time and going away. And let's be blunt about this, although the government's loath to say it, it'll be at least a year, maybe longer, maybe a couple of years before those borders are going to be open. And so the question is, what can we do without flying across the world?
Thanks, Lloyd. Yeah, innovation because we have to, by crisis. Tracey, your comment on that connectivity regionally and globally, how do you see I'll just take you back to that previous discussion. How do you see the way in which we connect with our regulators and government as being any different from anything else you see across the DLA network?
Well, I agree with David in respect of, we are very lucky here in New Zealand with our relationship with our regulators. It's certainly been different overseas. However, putting that to one side, I think a lot of the actions that are coming out of the regulators are consistent. It is that focus on the customer. It's doing the right thing. It's fair treatment, clear communication. It's being proactive in these sorts of times. And I think we've had the benefit of our regulators here looking at what's happening sort of more globally. Our regulators have had the benefit from, let's face it, the discussions that we've been having with them for quite some time, and sort of a lot of the recent ones, facilitated through FSC, where we've all sort of shared our, global and our, sort of New Zealand sort of learnings with them. So, that all sort of adds into the mix and really gives us the opportunity to leverage off what's happened overseas and what hasn't happened, so well. So I think that's really important that we sort of maintain those relationships moving forward. The regular sessions, the briefing sessions that FSC's run with, Minister Farquhar, Reserve Bank, FMA, etc., have just been sort of brilliant. So I think that's really something that we sort of, need to treasure. I think too, though, that, this time is really important for industry to sort of step up and to just continue that sort of reflection and how we do things better. I think that Rob Everett at one of the sessions said that, it's how we sort of react at this time will sort of determine necessarily the form or the extent of regulation moving forward. So the financial services sector is really important to New Zealand coming through this, and we need to be, bringing our A game to it, as, all of our clients are.
Yeah,
awesome. That's
Richard,
really interesting.
Just to jump in briefly, I think one of the things we're going to see is Australia, and I know this from our sister firm, MinterEllison in Australia, has broadly had a similar story. They've done lots of things differently in the detail, and they do have some different issues or problems that we haven't had, but Australasia again has come through pretty well. I think we see similar things in various parts of East Asia. I think one of the features of this big pivot is really going to cement this as being the western coast of the Pacific Ocean is going to be where a lot of activity is happening. And if we look further afield to the US and Europe, they're just in the beginning of a very, very tough time. So there are lots of things to learn from looking slightly west and looking north.
Fantastic, folks. With a 30-second closer for each of you, if we're sitting here in 12 months' time, paint the picture for us. David, if I go to you first.
Well, clearly from what's been said by others, we're not, by Lloyd, I think, I'm not going to be sitting on a beach somewhere in the South Pacific, so that's a bit sad. 12 months, look, I think we're still going to be working through some of this. Hopefully we've seen some great digital transformations, and the bulk of our clients, bulk of the sector are still out there thriving and doing great stuff to deliver great outcomes for the customers, and we're looking forward to helping them through it.
Thanks, David. And Lloyd has gone back to his beachside resort. Lloyd, over to you.
Well, I think you'll be at the beach, David, but as I've illustrated, you'll be there virtually, which will be just as good. I mean, as many of us have said, this is going to be a long journey. I think financial services as a sector is going to come out of this reasonably well. It's not going to be as hard hit as many others. But as I think Tracey was saying, there are new ways of doing business we're only learning to embrace, and we'll all be quite comfortable with those in a year's time.
Thanks, Lloyd. Tim?
Yeah, that will be shortly after, I suspect. EPSLA has just been introduced, so probably chasing up a whole lot of people who should have got their job done and be well lined up and ready for the implications of the new regime, and unfortunately, due to other pressures, hasn't got to it. We won't be school teacher-ish. We will be trying to assist them to restore themselves to the position. So I suspect that's going to carry on for a few months onward. As far as the economy goes, I think it'll be starting to get to the point where it's recovering and things are looking a bit rosier after a bit of a trough, probably in late this year, and people will start thinking about the new spring, even though it's not spring, as far as the business cycle goes. So I think that's an optimistic view, but I think that's realistic given the amount of stimulus the government's putting in place at the moment. Thanks, Tim. And Tracey, last word to you.
Look, I think I agree, we'll still be working through things, but we will be doing that sort of together and from a better position. You know, we would have learnt these lessons, better technology, etc. I would have hoped that we would have really sort of focused on our conduct and culture, and we'll be walking the talk.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all. Thank you to the 4 panelists. There are plenty of people out in Zoom land who are giving you a virtual clap as we speak. There's no doubt there are challenges ahead of us. There's also no doubt, to Tracey's point, that our conduct and culture and how we help New Zealand come through this is going to be happening every day, every minute of the things that we do. And I think the tone we've collectively set is heading in the right direction. So thank you all. To the people on the other end of the line, there's an evaluation form which will pop up any moment now. We appreciate all of your feedback. Helps us put on interesting things into the future. And on that note, at 4:18, have an awesome afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you on the next call. Cheers for now.